All right, well, welcome into the Influencer Series. Today, here with John Buchanan. Thanks very much for your time, John. It's a great opportunity today to come in and actually chat to someone who certainly I've been following for a long time. I've, like a lot of people in business, but also in life, have some people who I've followed over the last 20 years in business that have helped me talk at times to business leaders and influencers in various marketplaces across the country that I take little pieces of gold and certain things that I've seen in you in your life over the last 20 years that has indirectly been playing out with myself. It's a great opportunity today to sort of talk through some of those stories with you, some of your experiences, because I know in a lot of the conversations that I have and Rana and I have on a daily, weekly basis with our clients and people within our groups and our subscribers is how to play at the top level and how to, as a business owner, really, develop a culture of high performance in mindset and in action. And so I just thought it was a great opportunity to catch up with John today. I was with John a couple of weeks ago down in Melbourne as part of the Vic Leaders community down there with Robert Ford. And it was a great opportunity to sort of jump inside your mind, John, and take what we can. Thanks a lot for coming along.
My pleasure.
Ripper. Hey, listen, for those of you who know John, some of the stuff I'm going to go through now will certainly enhance that. But certainly for some of you who don't know John Buchanan, I'm going to give you a little bit of an intro into who he is and what his last period has been all about in high performance sport. Before I get into the questions, if any of you have any questions through Facebook Live, if we have any questions and have any time at the end, we might even get a chance to throw some questions John's way from the community. Otherwise, I have a few questions here that are going to take us off in different angles and see where we can go and see how we can help you to possibly find your gold here today as part of the Influencer Series with John Buchanan. Let me just start by saying John is the former coach of the Australian cricket team. If that's where you've seen him before, the penny is dropped. And also at the highest levels within the Indian Premier League. John had a first-class career spanning 7 games with Queensland in the late 70s and began his coaching career in England, where he was a player coach for Oldham in the Central Lancashire League, as well as Cambridgeshire in the minor counties, also in the late 70s. Coaching success started here when Oldham won the league and cup double in 1979, which was the first time in around 40 years. And we're going to probably explore a little bit about that as well. Back home here, John had 5 successful years coaching the Queensland Bulls and took them to 2 Shield finals and 2 Shield titles, I believe it was. The first one in 1994-95 was the first in the state's history, and 2 Mercantile Mutual Cup wins. John also coached Middlesex in 1998, but you'll also probably know John most importantly and most clearly as the Australian cricket coach of the men's cricket team, being appointed in 1999, taking over from the then coach Geoff Marsh. It's been said that John was considered an unlikely candidate given that he had not played test level cricket as had his predecessors, which is a really interesting position that the team went, and I can't wait to explore that a little bit further. Like many leaders who perform their role at the highest level in business and sport, you certainly attracted criticism that the outstanding results were more about the team than about being a coach. And I look forward to hearing more about you and your theories in this space as we progress here today. Not just about sport, but really how that plays out also in business. Along with former captain Ricky Ponting, he led a side to numerous successes, including a world record 16 continuous test matches and 23 ODI victories in World Cup tournaments. Among more titles and records as the Australian coach, that includes Ashes victories and World Cup wins. It's a long list that would probably take the best part of this session, so I'm going to probably try to keep a little bit tight. With former captain Ricky Ponting, he's credited you as being one of the most important reasons why Australia completed their World Cup hat-trick of wins, and I'd certainly go along with that. In 2009, John was inducted into the Queensland Sporting Hall of Fame. In 2011, appointed to the role of Director of Cricket in New Zealand. You've also released a book, If Better Is Possible, which examines how business managers at all levels can lead their teams to greatness, which is a great segue in today's conversation. As is evident, John, the data shows that it's not just about who you have in your corner, but how data applies to the individual to increase the performance of the team. So, enough from me. I would really like to welcome you to John Buchanan, the former coach of the Australian cricket team. I'm nearly out of breath after that introduction. That's as long as a roll of sorbent toilet paper, I've got to say. How does that make you feel, as tired as I am?
No, look, it's always nice to reflect a little bit about what's happened in your past, and certainly nice of you to pick up some of the highlights.
Yeah, that's what I try to do. Speaking of highlights, I've given you a bit of an overview. A couple of things about yourself. Over to you. What do you consider some of the highlights from sporting careers that in the coaching, also playing, that has helped you sort of set the foundation for sort of coaching excellence and where you sort of find yourself now?
Yeah, look, I think one of the biggest things that I have the opportunity to talk to various leaders, whether they sit at board level, whether they sit at senior leadership team level, or somewhere managed teams and so on. I think the biggest thing that I've learnt and continue to try to impress on people, and that's about obviously just knowing yourself. I mean, it's a bit of an old cliche, but that was a pretty significant highlight for me, which occurred just before I took over the Queensland role in 1994. You had mentioned I'd played for Queensland, not that successfully, but there was 16 years between that season I played for Queensland and then taking on the Queensland role. And at that stage they had a coach by the name of Jeff Thompson who was running the side, been there for 4 years. And as you said, my playing pedigree was not necessarily one of the things that I was going to plonk on the table and say, have a look at this.
Not coming up against Tomo.
No, this CV. So I had to actually think about why I did what I did over the period of time, either leading into me being a player and then from being a player in 78, 79 to now applying for this role. And it took me back to my school days, it took me back to my parents, it took me back to significant mentors at university, in my work life, in my academic life, and then into the various roles that I occupied. And I realised in all of that what I was doing was coaching, but what did that mean? And so it required me to actually sit down and work that out. And sit down, when I say sit down, I think it's something, again, I try to impress on various leaders, is that everybody has a coaching philosophy, everybody has a whole set of values, a whole set of principles that they would like to deliver on a daily basis, but do they know exactly what they are? And to do that, it seems that you've got to actually remove yourself from the daily life, the daily hustle and bustle, and find whatever your quiet place was. So prior to going into that interview in 94, I was a little bit younger and a little bit fitter then, and so I'd just take off for a run. That was my quiet place. And I'd head out for as long as I needed while I had various thoughts in my mind, or questions at least. And so generally by the time I came back, I had begun to sort of formulate or cement certain ideas. So when I went into that interview then, I was very clear on my philosophy, what I was actually going to bring to the table that would be different to what was currently there.
And so what did you see that you brought to the table, sort of starting off playing as the coaching role for the Bulls?
Well, firstly I brought a different picture, a different vision, and I was just saying prior to this interview, I was listening to the chief digital strategist for Microsoft, a lady by the name of Kaplan, and the interviewer talked about Edward de Bono, who I'm a big fan of, and he'll always talk about, his books are around lateral thinking and six hats and provocation and so on, that actually tries to stop you thinking in a certain paradigm and look at a problem, an issue, in a different way. Her view is, well, forget about that, almost forget about that, forget about the box and create your own box. Mm-hmm. So I suppose that's what I was always trying to do when I came into the cricket scene, or came into any particular team that I was with, was to create a picture that was both stimulating, challenging, but was about doing things differently. So in essence, part of my philosophy always is about, no matter what game you play, it's about question mark, why have I got to play the same game as everybody else? Yes, we've all got to live inside the rules, the regulations of whatever the industry we operate in. Mm-hmm. Or in cricket, there's rules and regulations that go around how you play a game of cricket. Mm-hmm. But then why do I have to play it the same way as everybody else has played it for the last 100 years? We want to change the game, we want to do it differently. So that was really what I presented to Queensland Cricket. They said, well, how are you going to win us the Sheffield Shield? And I said, well, I didn't see that to be the job. My job was to enable Queensland Cricket to dominate domestic cricket for the next 10 years. That was the picture. We need to change system and process to do that, and then somewhere in there we'd win this thing called the Holy Grail. Now, as it turned out, we won it the first year, and so maybe that was a blessing, because it at least encouraged them to employ me again for the following year and a few years after that, you know. So, but I really believe that was one of the things that I'd even experienced, you know, 16 years previously, that was holding Queensland back. That all it had was this box, if you like, of winning a Sheffield Shield. Mm-hmm. So it was time to get outside that box and begin to explore something completely differently.
You know what's interesting? One of our connections, one of our friends in business, made a comment last night in discussion about our chat today about, you know, people like, you know, Rod McQueen, you know, people who came in as a visionary inside of a sport, and Postecoglou inside of football. You know, guys who come in at the state level, really take it, turn it on its head by doing something a bit different. You know, Wayne Bennett with the Brisbane Broncos. Do you see some sort of commonality at a high performance leadership level that these guys have that seems to be different to other people?
Well, look, I think that's just one part of the puzzle. Mm-hmm. You know, so to probably better define what I mean by peak performance, it's well, in the cricket sense, it was about performing over, in the Australian team, over 8 years. With Queensland, it was over 5 years. That we're able to dominate the competition. It didn't mean we won everything, but we would win 80 to 85 to 90% of the time. But the whole idea was about dominating our competition. So I think to have a very clear picture on what that is, this sense of dominance, is important, but it's then, well, how does that play out? What do we do about that? You know, what are the strategies that we need to put in place? Yeah. So I think the people that you mentioned have been very good at picturing what and how they want to play the game in their particular sports and so on, but then are able to action that, are able to actually make it work with players, teams, conditions, and so on. Because
the game is one thing, but the personalities inside of that are a whole another level of leadership.
Yes, yeah, they are. I mean, and that's what business is. I mean, that's the same thing. I mean, it's very simple to, again, in a sense, have a picture, but then we're actually dealing with people on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, on a minute-by-minute basis, and people change. Some people who are not necessarily your greatest supporter one day may in fact be a fantastic ally the next, and quite vice versa. And so it is all about dealing with people and putting the time and the investment into people, developing the relationship with people, so that hopefully when it's required, you can press the right buttons, you can convince them what you're doing is of benefit to them as well as to the team or the organisation or the business, and they will follow, they will want to perform.
And there was a nice little sort of, as you said, the time investment in the individual. How do you find an individual within a team, in a business sense, for example, or in a sporting sense that you draw upon to respond here, is a well-oiled machine as a team with 11 great players. If one person, a member of talent within that team, is playing for themselves rather than the team, can that have a detrimental impact that you've seen on the performance of the whole? Or how do you sort of play with an individual who sees themselves bigger than the rest?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of questions in there. First and foremost, I should say that no matter what the team, what the business, what the industry and so on, is that you want every individual to be their own best coach, right? So you want each individual to virtually be able to roll up every day and have their personal best day, or put themselves in position to have their best day, because if each person in the organisation or the business or the sporting team is doing that, it does put you in a reasonable position to win games. So therefore I wanted my players to be quite demanding of what they needed to be best prepared, to give themselves best chance of having their best day. And so that does place a lot of demands on staff, coaches, resources and so on to do that. But it's very important they do. So every team is made up of a whole set of individuals. So first point, we've got to try and get the individuals right. Now inside that you will have some individuals that are far more demanding than others, or at certain times, and these so generally are the star players. They really demand a lot of attention because they are, in a sense, they are that good. And so yes, we need them, albeit that they might come with some baggage or behaviours and actions that you would far rather stayed outside of the team than did. But nonetheless, because they win your games, or they win your deals, or they win your contracts, or whatever it might be, you will take them into the group and then work out how to manage the fallout of some of that, because they will offside people, they will sometimes offside clients and customers in terms of them achieving what they're wanting to achieve. But as a coach or a leader or a business manager, you take that on board and you have to actually deal with that. Now, and so therefore I call them conditional team players. So, which means if they're doing all the deals and life's good and people are looking at them, then they're pretty collaborative, they're pretty supportive, they're pretty sharing of their successes and so on. But once some of those things are not quite working right, then that's where they become quite fractious to the group. They really can actually split the group apart. And of course, they point fingers everywhere else. It's got nothing to do with them, it's got everything to do with everybody else.
Could I just ask then on that, in a business context, a lot of the people who we have around us are small to medium-sized business owners who have some high-demand players in their team who can be quite fractious. However, they're bringing in some amazing results, some high-performance salespeople, some whiz-bang marketers who can really set themselves above, and that they play in that top 4 to 5%. But they are fractious to the culture of a growth organisation. How would you working around a team, or what would you say to a leader who's working with those people in their team? Is it something to let go? Is it something to nurture and grow? How do you play with that?
It's almost an answer for each individual to work that out themselves, I suppose, per business. But for me, as I was saying before, if they're still providing you the deals, if they're still a marketing genius, if they're still winning you contracts and so on, my view is you keep them in the side, because there's no better place than a winning dressing room. There's no better place than a business that's actually on the way up. It's growing, it's developing, it's got some momentum and so on. So there is no better place. So if somebody can actually almost guarantee that by their actions and what they do with their customers, then you want to keep them. Because if you don't keep them, your opposition's going to grab them.
So is it a leadership issue that you can't keep them, or is it a performance issue?
Well, it potentially becomes a performance issue, but it's also a leadership issue. I mean, as a leader, you've got to work out how you work with that individual, how you work with some of the fallout, as I said before, that will impact on others in the group. And sometimes you're not the best person to do it. Sometimes you've got to work out that the way that I maintain this person and the culture that I'm looking for is that I'm going to manage them through their peers. And so, I could talk about Shane Warne, for instance, within the Australian cricket team. When I first came in, there were some older players, only a small group, and the rest were relatively young, either by age or experience in the team. So he was quite influential on the group, and I guess some of what I saw in his actions, or if you like, contributing to the culture that I thought was important and the values that I thought were important to the team, we probably had different views on that. And so that's where we butted heads early on. But nonetheless, he was still very important to the group because he was winning his games. So we had to work out a way to deal with that. Eventually, the best way to deal with that was through peer management. It was that we were able to gradually build a continuity of players and people in that group who then became his managers. If he stepped out of line, it wasn't really the coach's job to step in or directly, but others would step in on the basis that that wasn't what was required. We value you in terms of what you do on the field and how you go about it, but there are some things we don't necessarily agree with. If you want to be part of this, then pull your head in a bit. So while the leader's, if you like, is still ultimately responsible, the leader also has to recognise that maybe they're not the right person to actually deal with people or situations at certain times, and that's what you have to weigh up, I guess, each time. There's no science to that, but a lot of that goes back to what I was saying before. It's about relationships, and if you understand the relationships, you can quickly work out, is this for me, or is this the right time, or is this the right way?
Yeah, of course. You know what's interesting? I go back to you. I remember sort of going back, say, 15 years ago. I'd be sitting there with my dad watching you play, or you as the coach sitting in the stands or sitting in the coaching box, and I'd see you behind laptops. It was the first time I'd ever seen a coach not standing either on the sideline with the players or but they were sitting there behind laptops, and it looked like you were perusing data. You know, you were letting the numbers, and this is the phrase that I've been playing with for years, is the numbers will speak so loud that you don't have to. And I know a lot of people who sort of know me, they shudder every time I sort of say that because I harp on it quite a lot. From me, from the outside looking in, you were letting the datas give you the guidance as to where you'd sort of have conversation or start conversation. You let datas remove the emotion from a conversation because it was very logical. It was very, it was true. What was sort of going through your mind as to how data would play a role in helping you lead, and how that helped you to be able to take the team from where it was to be the best in the world?
Look, that really started when I first started with Queensland back in 94, 95. And that was really a recognition that when you walk into a room, and it could be a boardroom or it could be your sales team room or whatever, huge amount of knowledge, experience and wisdom in there, and never do you want to lose that. And so with that knowledge, experience and so on, you get some very good information. However, my belief was that it was never quite precise enough. So to complement that, we introduced computers. So computers were firstly introduced, at least in cricket, in that first year that I was involved. Now, I'm no computer or IT boffin at all. In fact, I'm still a Luddite, but I do recognise that technology was important. Technology could improve things. And so my role was to say to the people who are designing the technology and the programs, this is what I'd like to see at the other end. This is the data I want to be able to read. This is the trends that maybe we can track over a period of time. Now, if you can actually solve all that, that's great. So the reason for that, though, of course, as I said, was two things. One was being more precise on feedback to players. So rather than if somebody walked off at the end of the day and said, I had a great day, and that was because I made 100 or took 5 wickets, that may be correct, but there's some other stuff that's gone on there. Or conversely, if I scored a duck or didn't take any wickets, I had a terrible day, that may not be correct because, again, I've done some things on the way. So I wanted to actually show them that the process of getting the result. And so therefore I could be far more precise in the feedback that I would give to my athletes. And so that's exactly what I'm really interested these days around business, is just that whole coaching approach, utilising technology and data in a way that provides very useful information as immediate as possible so that you can actually affect performance immediately. And then the other side is obviously analysis. So if we could gather more and more data on opposition or grounds or trends or whatever, then it was just part of the planning and preparation process, which is all about giving yourself best chance when you go into competition. And so the same thing in business now. There's a lot of data around. And I did actually, again, reflect on this conversation I heard on the radio just coming in here. They talk about small data and as opposed to big data. And the example given was that Lego is this very, very innovative firm. And the small data analysts go into a child's bedroom where they've got lots of games and pieces of equipment and so on. And they have all these conversations and watch what the children are doing. And the story goes that the young child had an old shoe on the shelf, and they got to question that, and it was just an emotional connection. It was a connection back to his dad, and it was one of his dad's old shoes. And so that then got them to rethinking about some of the emotional connections that you can draw for, obviously, the Lego equipment. I don't know what that led to, but that was the whole point. So, you know, it's, to me, you know, the analysis and the data, exceptionally important in terms of trying to understand where the game's going, or if we are actually trying to change the game, are we actually heading in the right direction? Are individuals heading in the right direction? And if we are, or if we're not, how does that affect our training program? How does that affect our planning? How does that affect the type of people that we actually want to bring into the program in the first place?
Perfect. One of the things that I see now inside of business as it's growing in larger business, in sort of small to medium enterprise, is a culture of just standard growth. You play in a world of peak performance. You've played and you've coached at the highest levels in sport. You work with some of Australia's largest organisations and most successful organisations. How do you see, as we're sort of moving into a very rapid change period, you know, change is the only constant, how do you see leadership is handling the rapid pace of change to be able to enable growth at a peak performance level? How do you see that sort of playing out at the moment?
Very good question. Look, like everything, I guess there are some leaders in terms of organisation businesses maybe that are doing it very well, and then there will be some that are not doing it very well and they're going out of business, and then there's a whole bunch of us that sit in the middle that are really wondering, how do we deal with everything that's around us, you know? So, you know, it got me to thinking, when you look at, say, business in Australia, who are some interesting examples? And I suppose Alan Joyce comes to mind with Qantas, because Qantas was almost going nowhere a few years back, 4 or 5 years, I don't know exactly when. And so Alan Joyce was appointed as CEO to right the ship. And today, I would have thought most people would suggest, if they looked at the bottom line at least of Qantas, if that's one of your measures of success, which you would suggest it is, because you want to stay in business, just like a sporting team wants to win games and a coach wants to stay in the role, he has to win games. It seems to be a transformation from where they were to where they are now, and what I see though is, from a distance, is that Joyce was under incredible pressures to resign, to get out, because he was making some very, very unpopular decisions. Around people, around cost cutting, etc. And but what he did was he stuck with, I guess, his vision of what it was going to be, and then how he was going to get there. And I think very importantly, the board backed him as well. Even though there were calls for his head so many times, the board backed him in terms of what he was trying to do, and I think that's really critical. So if I went to the sporting analogy again, it's almost the same as the coach and the captain basically being totally aligned. Yeah, otherwise it's just never going to work. You know, a couple of other examples I was thinking of, Atlassian, you know. So again, just doing a little bit of reading back on them. 2002 they started, a couple of young blokes, I think Farquhar and Cannon Brooks, I think his name, and basically they funded it on debt. You know, had a couple of ideas, came out of University of New South Wales, a couple of ideas, and then they created 2 products. You know, one was around project management, and the other one was around teams. And then suddenly, in 2015, I was reading that having gone through an IPO, a market capitalisation of about 4.37 billion. You know. So they had I guess a picture of what things could be. Their enabler was technology, and they backed themselves to do that, you know. And then there's a lady here, Maxine Horn, who headed up Phone Zone with her husband back in the early 2000s, you know, and this was about selling mobile phones, which hadn't really sort of made any sort of impact on the way that we operate, and of course completely different now. And she again believes very strongly in culture, team culture and values, and driving that. And now they're the Vita Group, 105 stores around the countryside, under all sorts of pressure, but still very much believes in a whole set of values and culture and the way that that can drive a business. So, you know, so I think, and you know, I'm probably picking out one or two examples that demonstrate certain things. There'll be a whole range of other businesses out there demonstrating a whole range of other things. But I think, you know, leadership is definitely about, well, you mentioned Ricky Ponting. Steve Waugh was also my first captain. Stephen's mantra was taking the road less travelled. And that's why we hit it off so well, because I was about trying to change the game. He was trying to, you know, find a road that nobody else was taking. And it was not only the talking of that, but it was the actioning of that. It was the actually doing of that. And that's what leaders must do. It's a cliche, walk the walk, talk the talk. But in everything that you do, every action, behaviour you do, you need to demonstrate what it is that you want everybody else to do as well. Otherwise, if you can't, why should they?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you see that leaders think big enough nowadays? I mean, if you think about, you know, you mentioned Steve Waugh and your vision sort of moving into the Australian cricket environment, you know, even back to the Queensland cricket days, I want to dominate over the next decade. You know, that's thinking pretty big, especially stepping into Queensland where no one had ever sort of obviously thought that big before. They might have thought it, but they certainly never achieved it. Do you think leaders nowadays, you work with a lot of them, do you think they think big enough nowadays, especially given what's possible? Some people think that 10% is enough, whereas you'll speak to other visionaries and say 10% is last year, 10x is the new 10%. What do you think? Do you think leaders think big enough?
Well, probably the short answer is no, but of course, you know, it's tempered a little bit by the fact that, you know, they've got shareholders, stakeholders, boards and so on, who are demanding results on a at least a yearly basis. And if the results are not coming, well then, you know, again, your head's on the chopping block. So a lot of, I think, leaders, and look, sport coaches are going through exactly the same thing. If results are not coming these days, there seems to be very little patience from those who make those decisions. And so therefore, I think leaders are almost in survival mode. They deal with the short term rather than the long term. You know, let's just get through today. I mean, small, medium enterprise business are very much the same. You know, we're all just rushing around madly, you know, head down, bum up, and just getting through almost on a daily basis. Let's survive. Things hopefully will get better, and then I can actually stand back and, you know, do some other things. But it is a message that I do try to impress on people, and it is about dreaming. And again, it's strange that this interview mentioned the same sort of thing today. You know, they use the term daydream, but for me it's just about dreaming. You know, as a young child, our world was full of dreams, you know. And I suppose that's one of the things that I've always done in my life, in my various careers. You know, as one dream or bubble burst, it was time to dream of something new. Where else could I go? Where else could I be? What else could I do? And I just think people need to actually take time to dream. That was the title of the book, If Better Is Possible. You know, and of course it is. It always is, provided you give yourself the opportunity to look at how that can be. So, you know, when I walked into that Australian cricket team, it was a very successful team. It had just won a World Cup in 1999. One in the West Indies, which they hadn't done previously. But my view was that there's so much that could be done here. So you look at the technical skills of individuals in the group. If we're going to chase our vision, and my vision was about Everest, we're going on this journey to Everest together, then we need to do a whole lot more around our technical skills, and even just basic technical skills. You know, physical skills, we need to change this, the way that we operate. You know, we want to be athletes, we just don't want to be cricketers or players, we want to be athletes. Our mental skills was really learning from the likes of Stephen Waugh and, you know, this mental toughness, understanding your routines that enable you to play in a moment, then switch off, get away, and then switch back on when you need to. So getting people into the habit of being able to switch on, switch off, and then our tactical stuff, which we've just talked about. That's all about planning and preparation, and knowing that you've done everything you possibly can to give yourself best chance of performing at your best. You know.
Yeah, right.
So no, I think leaders, senior leadership teams, even people, you know, because again, as I said, I'm really keen for anybody in an organisation to be a leader. They should be.
Yeah.
That's what we want. We just don't want to leave leadership to the so-called people who sit at the top. Leadership is everywhere through the organisation. So therefore, individuals need to dream as well. They need to dream about what they could be. And if they understand what their personal best is like, then how much better could I be? And therefore, if I can be, what is it that I need to change?
You'll think about the book Good to Great by Jim Collins, where he goes and examines 1,500 CEOs from US companies over a 35-year period, and comes down to about sort of the baker's dozen of leaders within those companies who are separated from good to great. And the one thing that sort of sits inside of that is the ability to think as one, but also allow the team to be great, and the leader sort of stands behind it and pushes everybody else forward to take the accolades. One of the things that I saw in you as the former coach of the Australian cricket team was you let the team sort of take it. They were out there catching the ball, hitting the runs, and holding up the Tupperware, but you seem to be very humble around your role inside the team. Do you see being humble as a coach or a leader inside a sporting team is essential for greatness, or even in business? How do you see being humble, that quality, has assisted you? From my perception, you might disagree, but being humble, how's that helped you to achieve some of the successes that you've achieved that other people could potentially consider in applying in their role?
Well, look, I suppose humility, again, stems from your own coaching philosophy, values, and so on, which is, as I said, something important that I had to understand about myself when I took on the coaching role. So one of my key principles is to make myself redundant, and therefore, and also, as I said, create a learning environment. So the learning environment is about growing the individuals, not just as players, but as or cricketers or athletes, but as people, and giving them every opportunity to grow, learn, and develop. My role is to give them more and more responsibility and accountability, and it wasn't just obviously the players. I had assistant coaches and a range of other people that really I wanted them to take on far more responsibility, to take on greater leadership roles in terms of how they enact their roles. My job was, as I'm doing that, hopefully I can stand further and further back, because they're actually out there making good decisions on behalf of everybody. And so, yeah, look, I part of my value set, as I said, is around, I guess, humility. It's about keeping my ego in my back pocket. It's about servant leadership rather than directing leadership, you know. But that's not for everybody. Some people want to be out front. Some people want to take control. Some people want to direct. And neither's right nor wrong. Both have strengths and both have weaknesses. So therefore, it's about what you put around your strengths and your weaknesses to maybe fill in the gaps that are necessarily there because of the certain style, the certain values and philosophies you have.
Perfect. Well, it certainly helps me understand as a, you know, what I saw inside of you and how you coached. It certainly was something that then in reading Good to Great, and I've read it sort of half a dozen times in different aspects of my life in business, it's certainly one of the qualities that I see in a lot of the great leaders in sport. And also, the funny thing is, you don't necessarily see it in the great leaders in business, because invariably they're behind the team, if that makes sense. You know, I look at someone like yourself, I look at someone like Wayne Bennett, you know, as another person who sort of comes up in my sort of following of sport, that is someone who sort of sits back quietly, nurtures the person, and actually helps the person to be the best version of themselves at an individual level, and brings out the best of the athlete. Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. And again, as I said, I mean, each coach will do things differently, each leader will do things differently, but that needs to be totally rooted in their philosophy, their values, their principles, their cornerstones, because and again, everybody uses the word authenticity these days and so on. But in a sense, that's what it is. You've got to be who you are, and you've got to live by those principles. Now, that can bring you into conflict with either the organisation, the business, or for me in a sporting sense. And in those times, that's where it really questions how you deliver those. Should you deliver those? And you know, and again in business, you know, leaders will face those situations, and it's only when you face those situations will you understand what decision you need to make, because some people will actually compromise on that simply to retain their role, to retain their job, to retain their career, and that's possibly understandable. Families, mortgages, a whole range of different things going on in their lives, and therefore it becomes important. But for me, compromise was never on the drawing boards. So that meant that, you mentioned the England job or Middlesex job. That brought me into conflict with the captain and a few other people over there, and so it didn't work, and it was time for me to leave. In India, a similar sort of thing. It brought me into conflict with probably Indian culture, but a captain, Sourav Ganguly, and not that we didn't necessarily get on, it's just that I didn't believe he was the right person to actually lead this franchise and lead on the field, which very difficult then to take on an icon in India, or an icon anywhere, but an icon in India, and suggest that they shouldn't be team leader. So, but I could have taken the route of saying, well, we'll manage this for a while and we'll get by, but I couldn't live with myself seeing that happen and knowing what we were all trying to achieve at that time. So, yeah, it's about when you get to that point, what are you going to do about it?
Perfect. John, I've sort of just about run out of questions, but in sort of wrapping it up, you know, we've got a lot of people, as I said, a lot of people who are small to medium-sized business owners who are around this great country who, I suppose, look at someone like yourself and other leaders in the marketplace, in sport, more so in business as well, that look at some of your background and skills, and certainly what you're doing now around peak performance to helping business grow. And what would you say to an up-and-coming, an emerging leader, a struggling leader, someone who is thinking of moving a business from where they are and have been and taking it to another level? What would you say is something that these people should need, considering going forward as a quality or a mindset or an educational philosophy? What's the thing that these leaders are going to need moving forward to go from where they are now to where they need to be?
Look, we've already touched on it. It's a simple thing, but it's a difficult thing, and that is this concept of dream. You know, that means in phraseology these days, it's, you know, getting off the dance floor and getting up on the balcony, and there's no, I think, better way for a small business owner to try to look at their business, possibly look at it differently, try to understand the marketplace and how they want to position themselves. To do that, it means you've got to allocate time. And that's the difficult part, because as a small business owner, you feel like if I take this amount of time, even if it's only a couple of hours, and it won't be a couple of hours because you need to actually invest in it, maybe a couple of hours a week, but over a period of time. Well, how's the business going to run? I should be doing other things, you know. If I'm not there, I might be losing a sale. I might be missing a conversation that I should have with a customer. I've got a whole set of emails that I need to respond to quickly, so I can't afford that time. But it's a huge, it's a massive investment. So for me, for any business owner, but small business, I've got to get outside of the business. I've got to find my own quiet place where I can now begin to dream about what this business could be. And that dream could be just exit, you know, who knows. But without being constrained, put in that box of everything that's going around in your life. That's where I think you see really good leadership. That good leadership one seems to be able to stand back from the business, look at it dispassionately, objectively, clearly, formulate what needs to occur, and then comes back into the business and is quite decisive about the actions that must be taken. And I think for any business owner, but particularly in small business, you've got to find a way to do that.
To find that time.
Got to make that time.
And action. Yeah, goal. Listen, John, I've sort of pretty much all wrapped this up. I've really appreciated your time today. If somebody wanted to sort of reach out and have a conversation with you to potentially garner your skills to assist them in the world of peak performance and leadership and growth, how would they reach out to get in contact with you?
Sure. Look, www.buchanan.international, or they can go onto Twitter at John Buck, BUC, or they can jump on LinkedIn or Facebook, generally under John Buchanan Coaching or Buchanan Coaching.
Perfect. Lucky you didn't have social media back when you were coaching the Australian team. Would it have been a different place?
It would totally. I got out at the right time. Warnie was obviously reasonably handy on the mobile phone, but there wasn't too much else going on.
He could certainly capture a good video.
He could capture a good video. Certainly, people found it worth watching.
Yeah, they certainly did. John Buchanan, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Andrew. Good
Appreciate
on you.
it.
Yeah, good.